welcome again. This is the Ask the Expert panel, and you're welcome to ask us any kind of questions, although I don't know what you guys think, but I think you guys are obviously experts too, but in a different way. We're certainly deal with Huntington's patients and families and take care of them from different aspects, and we can try to answer questions from those perspectives. I think it would be useful, everybody probably knows everybody here, but it probably would be a good idea to introduce each of us. So my name is Burton Scott. I'm a neurologist. I work at the Huntington Center at Duke University. We are grateful to have an additional faculty member who's sitting in the back. Her name's Dr. Katie Moore, and some of you have met her, and she's one of our group. Has joined us recently, and we're very pleased to have her. But so I'm a neurologist, and so I take care from the perspective of thank you. Trying to deal with problems as they come up and prescribing medicines. And then we also have, we do a lot of clinical trials, or do several clinical trials in Huntington's disease. And I'll ask others to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. I think it sounds like it's on, right? Do I need to go up a little higher, or like shoulder or something like that? Okay. I'm Dr. Bonnie Hennig-Trestman. I'm the director of Carilion Clinic's Huntington's disease program in Roanoke, Virginia. I came down to Virginia about 5 years ago. I was the director at the University of Connecticut Health Center in Connecticut. And now down here, was not expecting to open up a Huntington's disease program. I was expecting to wear a lot of my volunteer hats. I am part of the board of Huntington's Disease Youth Organization that Kristen mentioned as part of the research committee. I also am the special programs director at HD Reach. Some of you have interacted with me. I'm part of the Huntington Study Group. I do research. I have a private practice. I wear lots of different hats because I love this community. I've been working with people who have Huntington's disease and their families for over 20 years. And just thrilled to be able to be here. So hopefully you are truly, as Dr. Scott said, the experts, but hopefully we can provide some information with some of the questions that you do have for us.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Martinez. I am an organic chemist and cancer biologist by training. I actually met Bonnie in Connecticut during my mother's own testing journey. Even though I'm a chemist by training, I've actually sold my soul a little bit and became a healthcare consultant. So now I focus on outsourced pharmaceutical services, including CROs, CDMOs, the companies that focus on developing drugs, doing clinical trials, and I'll be offering a family perspective today on the panel.
My name's Mary Edmondson. I am a psychiatrist and an internist and the founder of HD Reach, and I was the first medical advisor to the North Carolina chapter when it was developed in 1998. I was thinking about Kristen talking about her 10-year anniversary and how important it is to celebrate celebrations. My dad developed Huntington's when I was young, but I didn't really figure it out till I was 15. So this year's my 50th anniversary of knowing about Huntington's disease. And so I have to say it's been a journey. It's been a long journey. There have been multiple times I've had to step back and think through some of the things that Kristen mentioned. And as I've gotten older, especially after I lost my brother, I had sort of conceptualized Huntington's disease as a demon, believe it or not. There's a story behind that, but I'd sort of conceptualized Huntington's as a demon, and when my brother died, that demon had stolen one more family member from me, and I was so angry. Like most of the time you feel grief, but I was furious. So I made the decision to go back and rewrite the history of my life. Now, how can you do that in the context of Huntington's disease? But basically what I was asking myself to do was look with adult eyes at the things that had happened to me throughout my life and see if, as an adult, if I saw that or if I was there at the time, what would I have said to that 15-year-old girl? What would I have said to that 23-year-old girl? What would I have said to that 40-year-old woman who went through genetic testing? So I see Huntington's disease from multiple different perspectives, And I'm really super happy that Claudia has offered me an opportunity to begin to work again with Huntington's families and to be part of their journey. It's the silver lining of this disease to me. Sorry to take up so much time.
You're fine. My name's Alease Daniel. I'm new to Huntington's and new to board member of HD. My background is in reproductive health, IVF. So I'm an embryologist. I work in the lab. So I'm happy to answer any questions about IVF and doing IVF for Huntington's screening, all of that sort of thing. I don't have as much experience with Huntington's as they do, but I have some IVF experience that can be related to Huntington's.
All right, so very good. So that's our panel. We do have a list of questions that folks sent in to us earlier, but if you have questions now, please, we can start with that.
Warm up the crowd if that helps.
Okay, sure.
So these are questions from that people have submitted over the last couple of months. The first question, and I'll address the panel and you guys can choose who takes it. What types of things should I be doing to prepare if I'm not showing symptoms yet?
Repeat it. Do we have to repeat it so it gets onto the audio? What types of things should I do to prepare if I'm not symptomatic yet? So somebody who's at risk.
Yep.
Okay.
Someone who's tested positive, but they don't have symptoms yet.
I see. Okay.
So you want to go with that?
I think there's a lot of things that people can do. First of all, my hope is that, and Kristen alluded to this when she was talking about her brother, my hope is that when people who are at risk, so we're going back a little bit, really will take an opportunity to talk to family and friends before you're tested. I think it takes a huge burden off of people when you are able to say, do you want to be with me on my journey? Because then afterwards, you're not saying, oh my gosh, I've got to make a decision about when I should tell you. When I should tell you I'm positive, when I should tell you I'm negative. Because as Kristen said, a lot of times people do think, well, if you're negative, I'm going to be positive. Or if you're positive, I'm going to be positive. And we do know that chance has no memory. And I think that it's really important to know that sometimes our heart and our heads don't collide a little bit, so that it really people kind of can go off on a tangent. So I think it really is important, first of all, to be able to have the opportunity to talk to people to say, here's my journey, I'm going to go on, do you want to be part of it? That way it takes that burden off of you and it gives the control back to that other person who says, yes, I do, or what questions do you have, or what concerns you have, or what, how is this journey going to look? Then, in terms of somebody being positive and what we call asymptomatic, not having symptoms, there's lots of things that you can do. You can be part of an observational study, or sometimes there's even clinical trials that are coming down the pike for people who don't have symptoms. Maybe that's a little further down, but you can be part of observational studies that are happening with Dr. Scott. Maybe Dr. Testa is going to have that, like Enroll HD. So you can be in the waiting room for other clinical trials. You can decide if you want to have a baseline, if you want to get to know a healthcare provider and say, I don't think I'm symptomatic now, but sometimes there are things that we see that you might not, and we could give you a little bit of feedback to say, this is how things are going. So a baseline, that could be either neuropsychological testing, and we have a couple of people here who do that you can speak to. That could be through your center that you go to. And you can be part of a support group. And also know that you don't have to do anything. That's a choice as well, that if you feel like you just want to be able to say, this is information, I'll let other people in my family know, and we can have an open discussion. And I really, really suggest people do have open discussion. Catherine and I, through HD Reach, offer a couples retreat. I don't know if anyone here has been on that. We've offered 2 already. And that's for people who have just been tested, who are pretty much asymptomatic, or maybe even early stages, to be able to talk to that loved one as a couple, to be able to say, here are some things that we can do and have open communication. So I think that there are a lot of things, and I may have only touched on a couple that I'll offer to the panel, to be able to go forward and be able to do, even if you have tested positive but feel like you're asymptomatic.
So I'd like to just add a few more comments. It's a very personal journey, how people decide to go through what are the pre-symptomatic and then prodromal stages of Huntington's disease. And I think, everybody figures out their journey. But if they came and they asked me, what should I do? Like, how should I get myself in my best shape before Huntington's, begins to develop. The first thing I'd say is exercise as much as is feasible in your day-to-day life. Work on core, work on aerobic stamina, just work on keeping on your feet. If you have any questions about an exercise routine, you can go find a trainer, you can go see a physical therapist. But exercise is incredibly important for people with HD across their entire lifespan. The second thing that I would suggest is that you consider your rules about alcohol. I'm not saying nobody can ever drink. I'm just saying you need to consider what your personal rules are about alcohol. Because alcohol is not good for the human brain, whether you have Huntington's or you don't. And you want to hold tightly to every healthy neuron that you have. And there's other ways to celebrate. There's tons of information flooding us all the time about alcohol. It's interesting just to stop for a while and see how the world responds without you being a part of it. But it's one of those things that you need to make a conscious decision about what your plan is about alcohol. The third thing that I would do is I would think about advance directives in a way most people don't. I would think about who is the one person that I trust to give me the bad news in my life that's going to happen to me. Who can give me information about my driving capability? And is that going to be something that I want my sister to tell me about, or is it something that I want my doctor to tell me about? And making those decisions before you get to that gnarly time when you're losing independence and you've got tons of things going on and you're losing a lot of things, that you need one person that you can trust that says, now's the time. So, Chrissy, I think you need to listen to yourself first. If you feel uncomfortable behind the wheel, start making best friends with an Uber driver. Well, so that's also part of planning, is what is my transportation plan going to be for me when I can't drive? And that way driving is not such a huge loss of independence, right? So, I don't think you can plan for everything in life, but there's some pretty predictable things that happen in Huntington's disease. And if you make those plans when you are, before you have clinical symptoms, which is that, we don't do a very good job of saying, okay, this is the moment of clinical symptoms. We, as a group, we still struggle with what that definition is of onset. But I think that when you are functioning at 100% across the board, that is your best time to make these decisions, the very best time to make them. That, of course, means you have to understand that you have Huntington's and you have to let go of some of the grief. So my final question is if you have any baggage, and let me tell you, if you're from a Huntington's family, you have baggage. If you do, go find somebody who can help you work that out. You will never be at a better time to process that information than before you get ill. And they're good people.
Something too, just something you had said about alcohol. One of the things that we didn't mention here is also drug use and things like marijuana. So I'm not going to open up a Pandora box, and most of the people here are adults and can make decisions. You have a neurologist here, you have a psychiatrist here, you can ask those questions. My feeling and what we have said to our patients in our practice is that there are no clinical trials specific that are true clinical trials, blinded, through medical marijuana, through a company, that we do not have, the jury, at least for our practice, is that the jury is not out in terms of that, and also in terms of alcohol, drugs are bad for your brain. So I think that's really important, and I love what Dr. Edmondson said, just in terms of finding, that support and working through. I think that that is something when people are asymptomatic, when they're at risk, when you're from a family, finding a support group, finding a therapist. I know that we are few and far between, and it doesn't have to be somebody who is specifically an expert in Huntington's disease, but find someone you have a good relationship with. And if you go to a support group and say, I don't like that, that's one support group. If you go to a therapist and say, I don't have a rapport with that person, that's one person. So find somebody that you can do, all of these things. So I just wanted to add alcohol and drugs together on that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I would just add one other thing. I know we've been on this question for a long time, but think about that community that you have surrounding you, right? I think a lot of the comments that we've already made are related to how do you build that support around you. And I personally don't believe that you can withdraw from an account you haven't deposited in. So think about that early, build that community around you and that support around you, so that you maybe need a ride somewhere, you have that support. We were talking earlier during the keynote speaker about her mother getting the police called on her. That happened with my mother. She would walk around town and she had a stumbling gait, and as a consequence people thought that she was a drug addict. Luckily her uncle was a cop in the town, so all the police knew who she was. That wasn't something that was built overnight, and because of that she was protected in a way that she wouldn't have been otherwise. So just be thinking about that at any time.
The driving issue is real important. There is some testing that we do, and pretty much whenever folks come to clinic, they have an opportunity to see the occupational therapist who does driving screens. And it's possible to get objective driving testing done too. And so that's an important piece of, or it can be an important piece about deciding whether it's time to hang up the keys or not. And then as far as the, one other thing I mentioned about the asymptomatic testing, the social workers are really good at focusing folks on whether they need to get additional ducks in a row before they get tested. So things like making sure you got your insurance is set up appropriately. Not something that you don't want to try to get life insurance after you've tested positive, for example. You want to get that done beforehand. So the practical insurance questions are important. The other questions, yeah.
Maybe there's a bunch.
There's one here first, I think it was.
Okay, let's go over here.
I had a quick question about insurance and nursing homes in particular. My mom was put in a nursing home, and they didn't exactly treat her to the degree that I thought that she should have been advocated for. And unfortunately, I was young enough that I didn't really understand everything that went into it. And I saw her, downhill and all that. And so I think one of the questions is that, for nursing home situations, who would be the best people to talk to for, an actual Huntington's, advocate? Because, they had no clue how to take care of her, at all. And I think that's where, if I go to the nursing home, I want somebody to advocate for me.
And you have a crystal ball, right? And I say this to a lot of families who are coming in, as Dr. Scott said, before you even open up, before you mention to any healthcare provider, you do want to look into all your benefits. So having something like long-term care insurance, not just life insurance, can be really helpful because it gives you the pot of money to say, this is the kind of care I want and this is where I want to go for that care. So I think looking at those things is really important. Part of the couples retreat that Catherine and I do is talking to people in terms of, if you didn't get that, who can you talk to now? You know, a lot of the people that we talk to at our couples retreat are people in their 30s and 40s and a little bit more, but that, you know, it's, in case you haven't done that, now's the time to talk to an elder care attorney and to be able to say, how can I put money aside to make sure? That's the first part. That's the proactive stuff. In terms of when we have people in facilities, I always say to families, make friends with people there. Make friends with the administrator. Make friends with at least one person, maybe the supervising nurse, to say, here's, you know, my loved one with Huntington's disease. This is what they were like before. This is what they like. And then be able to also know that there are people in your state, advocates, who are able to come in and advocate on their behalf, ombudsmen and different people, you know, who I think would be helpful. But I think it is also for us, and I think, you know, Dr. Scott can talk and Dr. Edmondson can speak about this, when our community is small, like Anthony had said, and I think it's really important to know that we would be willing, and we have gone into different facilities to say, I'm going to give an in-service about Huntington's disease, and here are some things that can be really helpful. So you build that community up, you find that 1 or 2 people in the facility, and you say, here's what my mom likes, this is what calmed her down, this is what riled her up, this is what she loved to eat. And really being able to have that. You were young, and I think that it's really important to appreciate that that put you in a really hard role, so I'm really sorry about that this happened to your mom and that you were in that role. This is not your fault. That was not your fault. You did the best job you could at the time, but I think knowing that moving forward we can do, and we can take your story and make it better for somebody else and for you, because we have information to be proactive. I'm sorry that was a little bit of a trigger, but I'm really glad you said that, because I think it can help other people.
Mm-hmm. And I can't echo enough how important those friendships are. When my mom ended up moving into a nursing home, I had to warn the staff she was a prankster, so she would hide in other people's beds to scare them. So, you know, they just needed to know that it wasn't because of her. Yeah, she thought it was the funniest thing in the world. So.
There were a couple of questions.
Yep, a couple of questions over
I was
here.
going to say, within our clinic, we really rely on our social workers a great deal. They either know it or they can find out as far as, you know, what's a good facility, what kind of additional support might be helpful for taking care of your loved one, kind of thing. But also, you know, identifying a good place. Also, the social workers help us with arranging these in-service visits, like Bonnie was talking about, where it's an opportunity to educate the staff at that facility a bit about Huntington's disease.
There are questions over here. Somebody had their hand up.
I just had a question. Somebody told me along the time that IFE was a good resource for brain function with Huntington's. Is that
What was it?
Vitamin E.
Oh, vitamin E.
Vitamin E. Oh, okay. So,
I was told that by somebody specializing in Huntington's.
so I'm not aware of any clinical trial testing vitamin E in Huntington's.
Yes, the question was, she heard about somebody suggesting vitamin E was something good in terms of neuroprotection or something like that for Huntington's. So sorry, go ahead, Dr. Scott.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, so I'm not aware of any clinical trials testing vitamin E in Huntington's disease that showed, showed benefit. So, you know, it's certainly important to get the appropriate amount of any vitamin, including vitamin E, but there's no known particular benefit to that.
And we do have people in our clinic who will come and say, I want to use ginseng, I want to use fish oil. I think the best advice is to make sure that you are telling your healthcare providers everything that you're taking. Even if you think it is just a supplement, even if you think it was something that you saw on YouTube, even if it was something that your cousin's mother's friend's best friend's dog got in Mexico that brought back, I think it's really, really important. So sometimes Dr. Trestman and I in our clinic will say, you know, this is something that we don't think will benefit, but we also don't think it might hurt you. So that's something to talk about. I heard a ding. Was that our, like, a time?
I think it was a phone.
And there was another question.
So I wanted to ask, well, I wanted to comment, one, like the nursing home thing, like our rule is like if my father runs out of cookies in the store or candy bars, like you need to tell us because there needs to be chocolate there. And then as far as advocacy, like me and my family member, like we've gone to places that
So I would ask yourself, who do they trust? What information or sources of information do they rely on? I struggled with that enormously in my family. I'm a first-generation high school graduate, so my family doesn't understand science. As soon as I start speaking about science, all of a sudden, the brow starts to furrow, and somebody goes, "Okay, Anthony, we all get it," right? So what I've had to do is I've had to find people and sources of information that they did trust. My mother never trusted me, but she would trust her aunt. So rather than me giving that information, I worked with my aunt, her aunt, my great aunt, to get that information to her at the right time to help influence her when she was open to it. She became very stubborn, especially as she got worse and worse. She had melasma, for example, pregnancy mask. She was taking birth control, it messed up her hormones. She was convinced that it was heat. So she kept the heat set to the lowest temperature in a house, wore a winter coat all the time, wouldn't trust anybody. But it was when we got her great aunt to engage with her to say, hey, maybe you should think about this differently, it clicked in her head. So think about those sources of trusted information. And one thing that I like to do when I think about influencing people, I like to sort of lay the breadcrumbs and help them see the path and see what's possible by sharing stories about my own experiences. And in doing that, I'm not forcing it on them, but they're connecting the dots on their own, and they're starting to think, maybe it's a little manipulative, but they're starting to think, hey, that was my idea, and that's a great idea, So those types of things are useful.
I think also just understanding your own energy, right? We can open up the door, we can lead people, we can say, I want to advocate, I want to talk to you about this. Then we have to figure out how much energy we have for ourselves. Because if we keep saying, this is frustrating, they're not helping with the loved one, or they're not looking at their own HD, at-risk situation or their status, and if you keep putting energy there, it saps out all that energy for you. So there is a part in terms of, this is as much as I can do, and I love what Anthony said about the breadcrumbs, because you're giving them the information, you're putting the pamphlets, you're talking about an event that you're going to, but then saying, this is as much as I can possibly do. And now they're on their own, but the door is going to be always open. And sometimes it's that next generation, talking to the cousins, talking to other people who are younger to be able to say, here's information for you. And allowing the family to know, I'm going to give this information to everyone. And the door is always open. So that's something just to reflect on for you.
Yeah, I guess I'll add one more story. Somebody said something to me once, and it really resonated with me. If the plane is crashing and the masks come down, what do you do first? You put it on yourself first, right? Because if you don't, there's nothing you can do for anybody else. So think about that in the context of caregiving, care partnership. You can do so much more only as long as you have the energy to do so.
I can't second that enough. I have 5 brothers. I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, had 1 mom and 1 dad. Huntington's times 8 is what happened in my family. And if I was to say, if I was going to go back and do it differently, I think what I would have done is focused less on Huntington's and more on relationships, like building your adult relationships with each other. And then, someday there's going to be something that's going to happen, and it's going to become completely obvious because the disease is going to tell her. And what she's really going to need on that day, she's going to need somebody to put their arm around her and say, you've always done the best you could. And I don't think that, I don't know that I've been to meetings where I've heard people talk about how families look at each other and say, this is a really hard thing, and I think you're doing a fantastic job doing it. Like, nobody congratulates you for the fact you don't cry at the dinner table, right? So I think for especially large, complicated families like mine, just work on relationships and know that there's going to be a day when you're going to have an opportunity to say, I know this is really, really hard to hear, but is it possible that this is an illness? You don't even have to call it Huntington's. You can say, do you think this is possibly an illness that a doctor can help you with? And I'm not going to say that those of us sitting up here who are healthcare professionals have the answers. We don't have all the answers. Most of the people in the room have a lot more practical advice to give you. But I know I can speak for everybody on this panel that we strive very hard to find not just resources, but good information to give people, to give them hope. Huntington's has changed generation to generation in my family. And it's gone from my grandmother being locked away in the first psychiatric facility in this country to, my dad dying at home. Every person in my family has been tested. I mean, our family has evolved. Every family evolves with HD.
And for some folks, it may be useful for them to know and understand that there's a lot of research going on that they can help with, that they can help come up with an answer to this by participating. And for many people, that won't be useful. But for some folks, I mean, for that to be part of the conversation is, we have this Huntington's disease. People are searching for answers. Well, the answers are partly going to come from research. And so individuals, family members can participate in research studies from the Enroll study to a drug study, depending on whether they qualify. But the gateway to helping to find an answer is to step into some sort of medical care.
Was another question?
No, I was just going to say, I'm not far behind Mary. I'm in my 48th year dealing with Huntington's. And my job's been not as near as difficult as theirs. I hardly ever deal with anyone with emotions. I've been a pastor for 25 years. It's really easy later because no one has an opinion. But the phrase that for the longest time has helped me is, have you considered it like this? Never tell anyone they're wrong, but have you considered it like this? Have you ever looked at it from this perspective? And then you can share, if you don't have the great hand that they trust, and you're pressed against the wall, you can share what they really need to hear, but without it being correct.
Just really quick, by show of hands, who here has heard of the analogy of the elephant and the elephant rider? All right. So the story goes that human beings are emotional decision makers. We are an elephant with a driver on top, just a human being controlling that elephant. So most of the time, the elephant is going to listen to that driver and go where that driver wants to go. But if that elephant wants to go that way, it's going that way, and there's nothing that you can do to stop it. That elephant is our emotional decision making, and you need to think about convincing that elephant in a number of ways. Show them that the path is safe and that they can go forward comfortably. Help them feel like they are the ones driving it. And just think about it in those ways, and it'll definitely help as you're thinking about persuading others. So.
And in my life, in my limited experience, I know of a man who died in the nursing home at 70 years old with Huntington's disease, who never took his first medication for emotional and physical symptoms. He wasn't a pleasant man at times to be around. And he wouldn't listen to the family. So all that can be done is to be there. All I could do is go and visit on an occasion. All I could do is help his son to reconnect with his dad. And that's all I could do. You can't make the person take the medication. You can't control it, but you can be present if they allow you. And if you can't be present, then you can, I would say pray. That's it positive. So it is. We're on it. I've never thought about that now.
I recommend if you guys want a little bit of homework, go look up Elephant Rider, Mr. Rogers. It's a video of Mr. Rogers convincing Congress that they need to expand PBS's budget. It's amazing because he gets this curmudgeon-y old senator, I think it is, to come over to his side, and you can see how he builds that argument to convince him. And by the end of the video, the guy is totally on board, and they're expanding the budget. So, yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left, so if anybody has one more question, otherwise I've got plenty.
I have a point to make. There's a lot of love in this community. There's a lot of love in the people that are here. Like Claudia said, 60%, maybe 70% of people with HD have never met another Huntington's family, and they have never met a doctor who knows anything about HD. And as members of this community, you may meet them when they first come in, and you may spend time with them. I just want to say that if if it works out that you can't do what Bobby said, which is to sit with someone who has HD, if you personally don't have the psychological energy, or you, for whatever reason, it's not a safe experience for you, and it bothers you, go find a therapist. Like I said, if you come from a Huntington's family, you've got adverse childhood experiences, you've got conflict with family members, you've got experiences with a boss who wasn't supportive of the fact that you were at risk and fired you. There's all kinds of reasons that people have hard times related to Huntington's disease, and that they, like there's times there's resistance and then there's times that are open. 50 years has taught me that I have to forgive myself for the times I can't be open, and that I have not been able to be present for people in whatever stage of disease that they're in. So, you know, my answer to that, no surprise here, is mental health. You know, like that and you know, faith. Those are the two different ways that you can sort of look at your failings is not the right word. I guess limitations, vulnerabilities, however you want to call them that. But I want to make sure that as we talk about all these positive things that you can do and strive to do and keep doing, it's very important to understand that if you hit that brick wall, you've hit it honestly. And maybe it's time for you to see if there's something that you need to resolve. One of my very first meetings that I ever went to where I spoke professionally, and I talked about all these different skills that you could use to work, to interact with people with Huntington's, because, you know, I thought I knew a lot back then. This guy walked up to me afterwards and he said, you know, I think all those things you told me that you told us are really great. What do you do when you don't want to do it anymore? Like, how am I supposed to live with myself that I can't do this anymore? I have hit my brick wall. I cannot take care of my wife anymore. And I was speechless. I just had no answer to that because I'd never thought about that. I've never thought about somebody hitting that brick wall and how hard that is and what are your next steps. So as much as, you know, we're going to support people who really get in there and they, you know, really the whole distance with their family, I also want to say that sometimes the best thing for everybody involved is for you to take a back seat for a while, warm your heart up with other people, let Huntington's be a little while, and then go from there. Claudia, you have something to say?
So the take-home message is hope. We hear about this so much, but we are passionate about this. There is hope for the future. There is hope for all of you. There is hope for all of us in terms of clinical trials, in terms of awareness, in terms of education and support. And if you're not getting it from one place, to translate a little bit what Dr. Testa said, pick up the phone and call somebody else. Never feel like you have to be alone. Even if you're saying, I might not be the person, the patient, pick up the phone and give us a call. Whether it's HD Reach, whether it's one of us, this community is there for each other, and we're not going anywhere. We hope that there's going to be a cure, but we're going to do this together. So every single time I see somebody in my office, the last thing is I want to make sure that you know that there is hope. And I think that that's what we need to leave everybody with, whether it's today or another day, that there's still a lot of hope.
Well, I think that's all we have. You guys, let's give everybody a round of applause.